Will Thorne's fingers were already red from the biting Chicago wind when he noticed the woman shivering at the bus stop. She wasn't dressed for this kind of cold, no gloves, her coat thin, her hands clenched under her arms. He could have kept walking, clutching his daughter's tiny mittened hand tighter and hurrying toward the school down the block. But something about the woman made him stop. Maybe it was the way she kept glancing at her wrist like she'd forgotten her watch, or the way her face was pulled tight, like she wasn't just cold, she was holding something in. "Daddy, it's freezing," Nora said, tugging his arm. He crouched beside her. "I know, baby, we'll be quick." He pulled off the only gloves he had worn, faded gray, and looked back at the woman. She barely noticed him until he said, "Excuse me, ma'am, you look like you could use these." Her head turned, and for a second, Will almost backed away. She wasn't just beautiful, she had that sharp, polished presence people in power always had. But her dark eyes softened when she looked at the gloves, then up at him. "I can't take those," she said, voice low but clear. "You can, they're just gloves. You need them more than I do," he said, forcing a small smile. "My daughter's warm, that's all that matters." The woman hesitated. Then she took them, slowly, like she wasn't used to kindness without a catch. "Thank you," she said, slipping them on. They were far too big for her hands. "You didn't have to do that." Will shrugged. "I've had worse winters, you take care." He guided Nora forward, but before they got far, the woman called out, "Wait, what's your name?" "Will," he said over his shoulder. "Will Thorne." She nodded slowly, then whispered, Faye Lancaster." He didn't think much of it, just another name. Another person in this cold city trying to make it through the day. What Will didn't know, what he couldn't have guessed in a million years, was that Faye Lancaster was the CEO of Lancaster and Rowe, one of the most powerful investment firms in the country. And she wasn't at the bus stop because she'd forgotten her driver. She was there because she had walked out of a board meeting after realizing she didn't recognize herself anymore. The gloves were still on her hands when she stepped into her penthouse later that night. The doorman had stared at them, confused. Her assistant had tried to ask what had happened. She ignored everyone. She sat down on her velvet couch, stared at the gloves, and realized she'd been more seen in that 10-second exchange than she had in years. Will didn't expect to see her again. His life was simple. Up at 5, pack lunch for Nora, drop her off at school, work 2 shifts at the garage, then pick her up from the babysitter by 7. He didn't complain. After Nora's mom left 2 years ago, he learned quickly that being a single dad meant no time for self-pity. So, when the same woman from the bus stop walked into the garage 3 days later, he almost dropped the wrench in his hand. She was in a black wool coat this time, heels that clicked across the concrete floor, and sunglasses that didn't hide much. "Will Thorne?" she asked, her gaze scanning the shop. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Faye." She smiled, and it didn't look like the kind of smile she gave during corporate takeovers. It looked real. "I was hoping I'd find you," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "You tracked me down for gloves." "I tracked you down because you gave them to me when you didn't have to, and because you left before could really say thank you." He laughed. "Well, you didn't have to come all this way. I didn't do it for anything." "I know," she said, stepping closer. "That's why I couldn't stop thinking about you." Will blinked. "That's a look. I'm flattered, but I'm just a mechanic and a dad. I don't." "I know who you are," she said quickly. "And I didn't come here to insult you or offer you a check or something stupid. I just wanted to see you again." He studied her. She didn't seem like she was playing a game, and even if she was, he didn't have time for that. Not with Nora depending on him. "You want a coffee?" he asked. "It's terrible, but it's hot." Her smile widened. "I'd love one." They sat on the hood of an old Chevy outside the garage, sharing coffee from chipped mugs while the cold wind tried to sneak under their collars. Faye asked about Nora. Will talked about her like she was the best thing in the world, because she was. I didn't always work at a garage, he said. I used to design engines before everything fell apart. What happened? Faye asked. Got laid off, then my wife left, took the savings, left me with Nora. He cleared his throat. I don't regret it, just had to start over. She was quiet, then she said, You didn't ask me what I do. I figured if you wanted to tell me, you would. She laughed, That's a first. He glanced at her, You a lawyer or something? Something like that. Faye wrapped her hands tighter around the mug. I'm the CEO of Lancaster and Rowe. Will blinked. Wait, what? Yeah, she looked almost embarrassed. I wasn't lying at the bus stop. I really did need those gloves, not because I was cold, because I needed someone to remind me that people still do things without expecting anything in return. He leaned back slowly. You're serious? Dead serious. Will shook his head. That's okay, wow. She looked at him, eyes suddenly uncertain. Does that change anything? He thought about it. The fancy coat, the polished look, the way she carried herself. It made sense now, but it didn't change how she'd looked at him like he mattered. No, he said finally, but I definitely shouldn't have let you drink that coffee. She laughed. I've had worse. The next week, she showed up again. And the week after that. She didn't come with bodyguards or designer bags. Just herself, in jeans and gloves that still didn't quite fit. She'd sit with Will on lunch breaks, talk with Nora when she came to visit, and ask real questions, like what Will dreamed of doing if he ever had the chance again. It scared him how easy it became to look forward to those afternoons. How quickly she slid into their lives like she'd always belonged there. One evening, as he walked her to her car, she stopped him. I'm throwing a dinner party this Friday, she said, at my place. I want you to come. He frowned. Me, I don't exactly own a suit. I'll take care of it, she said softly. Just say yes. Will looked at her, really looked. And for the first time since his world had fallen apart, he felt like maybe, just maybe, it was building itself back up again. He nodded. All right, I'll come. And her smile lit up the night like he'd just handed her the moon. The elevator doors opened with a whisper, revealing a penthouse that looked more like a luxury art gallery than a home. Will stepped out hesitantly, adjusting the cuffs of the tailored black shirt someone he assumed Faye's assistant had delivered earlier that afternoon. It fit perfectly. Too perfectly for something off the rack. He suspected it wasn't. Will, her voice drew his attention to the far end of the space, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering city skyline. Faye stood by a glass table set for 8, wearing a midnight blue gown with clean lines and simple elegance. And for once, she looked nervous. You clean up all right, he said, trying to sound casual, but his voice came out lower than he intended. She walked toward him, her heels silent on the marble floor. You came, she said softly. You invited me. I wasn't sure you would. He gave a half shrug. I've never been to a dinner party hosted by a billionaire CEO before. Her lips curved slightly. Technically, you still haven't. This is more of a gathering, just a few board members and some strategic allies. Right, casual, he said, glancing at the silver cutlery gleaming under the chandelier. I didn't bring you here to impress them, she said. I brought you because I wanted you to see my world. You sure it's a good idea to have a mechanic in the room with people who probably own half the city? I wouldn't have invited you if I thought you didn't belong. Before he could respond, a tall man in a tailored gray suit approached. Faye, they're asking for you regarding the Eastbridge deal. He stopped when he saw Will. I don't believe we've met. Will Thorne, Will said, offering a hand. The man looked at it like it was an artifact. Faye's guest. Will's a friend, Faye said firmly. He'll be joining us for dinner. The man's expression didn't change. Of course. As he walked away, Will leaned toward her. Your friend's always that warm. He's not a friend, he's an investor, and he's used to people who play the game. Well, I left my poker face at home. I like that about you. The evening unfolded in a blur of crystal glasses, whispered conversations, and carefully measured smiles. Will kept to himself at first, listening more than speaking, following Faye's lead. She never left his side for long, and when she introduced him, she did so without apology or explanation. Just Will, no qualifiers. He noticed the way people looked at her like she was both revered and feared. She carried herself like someone who had spent years learning how to make silence louder than words. But when she turned to him, her eyes softened, and her voice dropped half an octave, like he was the only one who saw the version of her that wasn't always in control. After dessert, she led him onto the balcony. The city stretched below like a living constellation. I hated this place when I bought it, she said. He leaned against the railing. Looks pretty livable to me. It felt hollow, like I was playing house in someone else's dream. And now? I don't know, she said quietly. You're here, and suddenly it doesn't feel so empty. He looked at her for a long moment. Why me? She turned to face him. Because you looked at me like I was human before you knew who I was, and every time you look at me, you still do. He studied her face, lit by the gold spill of light from the penthouse behind her. You ever wish you could disappear for a while? She nodded, all the time. So what stops you? She hesitated, then said, fear, that if I walk away, I won't know how to find my way back. Will reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object. Then, maybe you need a compass. She looked down at the keychain in his palm, a simple silver compass with a cracked face and worn edges. This belonged to my grandfather, he said. He gave it to me the day I left for college, said no matter how far you go, always know where home is. Faye's fingers brushed his as she took it. You're giving this to me. I'm lending it to you, until you figure out what direction you really want to go. The silence between them was full of weight and warmth. I've had people buy me islands, she said finally. That meant more. Good, because it's the only thing own that isn't covered in engine grease. She laughed softly, the sound unguarded. The next week, she didn't visit the garage, nor the week after that. Will didn't ask questions. He had work and Nora and bills to pay, but quiet hours turned louder without her. Then one Friday, Nora handed him a sealed envelope as he picked her up from school. A fancy lady gave this to me, she said, eyes wide. She said it was for you. Inside was a single card, white, embossed, no message, just an address and a time. He showed up at the address 3 hours later. It was a community center on the south side. The inside had been transformed, tables lined with food, new books stacked on shelves, a shiny new play area being installed in the back. Faye stood near a stack of donated coats, wearing jeans and sneakers, clipboard in hand. She spotted him and walked over, brushing sawdust off her jacket. You did this, he asked. I funded it, she said, but the idea was yours. My idea. You once said you had dreams if you ever had the chance again. She gestured around. This was one of mine. I just didn't realize it until I met someone who reminded me what it felt like to matter. He looked around the room, kids laughing, volunteers unpacking supplies. You didn't have to do all this, he said. I wanted to, she replied, and I wanted you to see it. She reached into her coat pocket and handed him the compass. I found my direction, she said, and it led me back to you. Before he could speak, she added, but I don't want to make a move unless you're ready. Will exhaled, heart pounding. I don't have much to offer you, Faye. No penthouses, no power, just me. She stepped closer. That's what I've wanted since the bus stop. He didn't kiss her, not right away. He just let his hand find hers, their fingers locking like something inevitable. You sure you're okay with old trucks and late dinners, and a kid who thinks ketchup belongs on everything? She smiled, I'm sure. They stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by laughter, paint fumes, and a future neither of them had imagined. And for the first time in years, Will felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was beginning again. Don't move, Faye said, stepping back from the easel with a streak of blue across her cheek. You're about to be immortalized in acrylic. Will sat perfectly still, one eyebrow raised. You sure this is a good idea? I barely managed to pass stick figures in 3rd grade. That's okay, she said, tilting her head. You're not the one holding the brush. The community center was closed to the public that Sunday, but the smell of fresh paint and the distant hum of power tools still lingered from the week's renovations. Faye had insisted on personalizing one of the walls not with a company logo or some plaque with her name on it, but with a mural. Something the kids could look at and feel like it belonged to them. Somehow, Will had become her reluctant model. How long do I have to sit like this? He asked. Until I say you're done. That's not ominous at all. She didn't laugh, but her eyes flicked up to meet his, and the look there was warmer than sunlight. I mean it, Will. I want this to feel different. It has to. He shifted slightly, careful not to ruin her reference. Different from what? From everything else in my life, she said, dipping the brush into a darker shade. I've spent years building things that looked good from the outside. This is the first time I'm building something that feels good from the inside. He studied her face while she painted the unguarded concentration, the way she bit her lip when she wasn't sure about a line, the streak of paint she hadn't realized she'd brushed across her jaw. It struck him again how far from her world they were and how little it seemed to matter now. Faye set the brush down gently and stepped back. Okay, you can move. He stretched his shoulders and stood, walking over to see. That's supposed to be me. She crossed her arms. It's a representation. It looks like I lost a fight with a Crayola box. You're missing the point, she said. It's not about looking perfect. It's about being here, being part of something. He glanced at the mural, then back at her. Then you should be in it too. She hesitated. I don't belong in that picture. Yes, you do. Her eyes searched his. Will, I'm not trying to play house. I know who I am, and I know you're not someone who lets people in easily. I'm not, he said, but that stopped being your problem the moment you handed me that compass back. She stepped closer, her expression unreadable. Is that what I did? You found your direction, he said, and you chose to stay. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she reached for his hand and gently guided it toward the wall. Then help me finish it. They spent the next hour painting side by side, not speaking much, just letting the quiet settle between them. It wasn't comfortable, not exactly it was charged, like something was shifting between them that neither had words for yet. When they were done, Faye wiped her hands on a towel and turned to him. I need to ask you something. He raised an eyebrow. That sounds loaded. It is, she took a breath. There's a charity auction this Saturday, huge event, black tie, I'm hosting, and I want you to come with me. To stand next to you, while you auction off yachts to oil barons. No, she said. To stand next to me because I want people to see you, because I'm not hiding this. He stared at her. You're not worried about what your board will think, you're investors. I've never cared less. He hesitated. You really want me there? I really do. Will nodded. Then I'm in. But I'm going to need help with the whole not looking like, just crawled out from under a car thing. Her lips curved. I'll take care of it. Saturday came faster than expected. Will found himself standing in front of a full-length mirror in a penthouse suite he hadn't dared step foot in until that night. His reflection stared back in a sleek black tuxedo that felt like it belonged to a different man. "Stop fiddling with the collar," came Faye's voice from behind him. He turned and forgot how to speak. She wore a floor-length gown of deep plum, simple but impossibly elegant, her hair swept back to reveal the delicate line of her neck. No jewelry, no flash, just her. Will let out a low whistle. "You trying to make me nervous?" "Is it working?" "A little." She stepped closer, adjusting his bow tie with steady fingers. "You look like you were born in this." "I definitely wasn't." "That's what makes it better." The ballroom was a different world: gold leaf ceilings, champagne towers, and guests who carried themselves like they'd never once worried about rent. But all Will could focus on was the feel of Faye's hand on his arm. People stared, some whispered, but no one said a word to his face. Until one man approached. Silver hair, expensive smile, and a voice that dripped with entitlement. "Faye," he said, kissing her cheek, "and this must be the man I've heard so much about." "Will Thorne," she said evenly. "This is Charles Denton, head of Denton Capital." The man extended a hand. "You're the mechanic, right?" Will took his hand, firm, unflinching. "That's me." "Well," Charles said, clearly amused, "Faye always did have a rebellious streak." "She's not rebelling," Will said, his voice calm. "She's just finally choosing what matters." Charles blinked, then forced a laugh. "Touché." He drifted off, and Faye turned to Will. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Later, as the auction wrapped and people began to drift toward the exits, Faye led him out onto the rooftop terrace. The city stretched below them, glittering and endless. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You sure you're okay being part of this world?" "I'm not here for this world," he said. "I'm here for you." Her eyes locked onto his, and she reached into her clutch, pulling something out slowly. It wasn't a necklace or a letter. It was a ring. Simple, no diamonds, just a brushed band of platinum with a single engraved line. Will stared at it. "Faye." "I'm not asking you to marry me tonight," she said quickly. "I'm asking if you'll say yes to all of it, to me, to Nora, to this life, whatever it becomes." He didn't need time to think. He took the ring from her hand, slipped it onto his finger, and looked back at her. "Yes." For the first time since they met, she looked undone. Her eyes shimmered, her shoulders dropped, and when he pulled her into his arms, she didn't resist. They stood there, high above the world, both knowing they'd still have to fight for it for each other, for the life they were building. But in that moment, nothing else mattered except the woman who had fallen for him, not because of what he had, but because of who he was. And the man who finally let someone in again, and found everything he didn't know he'd been missing. Rain had begun to mist the edges of the windows, softening the lights of the city far below the penthouse as Will carried Nora in his arms across the marble floor. She'd fallen asleep on the ride over, her cheek pressed against his shoulder, her thumb still tucked near her mouth, one of those little habits she hadn't fully outgrown. Faye opened the door to her guest room, already turned down and warm with low lamplight. Will laid Nora gently on the bed, pulling the soft blanket over her as Faye set the stuffed fox beside her pillow without a word. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of her breath. "She's been asking about you," Will said softly as they stepped back into the hallway. "I think the last few weeks made a bigger impression on her than I thought." Faye closed the door with care. "I was wondering if she'd be comfortable here." "She told me last night she wants to build a treehouse on your balcony," he said, and for the first time in what felt like years, his laugh came without effort. Said you had the best view. I'll have an architect draft plans by morning, Faye answered, smiling with her eyes more than her lips. They stepped into the kitchen, where the scent of roasted almond and vanilla from the cookies Faye had baked earlier still lingered in the air. She poured 2 mugs of tea, not coffee this time, and handed one to him. I talked to my board, she said, watching him over the rim of her cup. Will leaned against the counter. That sounds serious. They weren't thrilled, especially not Denton. You didn't have to put your neck out for me. I wasn't asking for their approval, she said, but I needed them to understand something. That this life I've built, it's not complete without the parts that make me feel human. Will set his mug down, studying her, and they accepted that. Eventually, her voice was steady. Because I reminded them that I don't answer to anyone when it comes to my personal life, and if they want Lancaster and Rowe to continue thriving, they'll remember that. He stepped closer. You've changed. No, she said. I just stopped pretending I didn't want more. Will reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a folded sheet of paper. He held it out to her. What's this? My resignation. She blinked. From the garage. He nodded. Effective next week. Her eyes searched his. Why now? Because I've been offered something better, he said. One of the guys from the charity gala, he owns a small automotive design firm, said he'd been looking for someone with hands-on experience and a background in design. I didn't think he was serious, but he sent over the paperwork yesterday. Faye unfolded the letter slowly, her fingers tracing the words. You're taking it. I already did, he replied. Nora and I need a new chapter, and it turns out I do too. She looked up, eyes shining with something more than pride. How do you feel? Terrified, he admitted, but ready. She folded the letter and handed it back. I'm proud of you. Will exhaled. I never thought this would be my life, standing in a penthouse, drinking tea with a woman who wears a gown better than most people wear jeans. She reached for his hand. And I never thought I'd fall in love with a man who can rebuild an engine blindfolded and make my world feel like it's finally real. He leaned in, brushing his lips against her forehead. You're not just part of my life now, Faye, you are my life. The next morning, Faye stood on the rooftop terrace, a breeze tugging at the hem of her robe. The sun was just breaking over the city, casting a golden hue across the skyline. She turned at the sound of small footsteps. Nora padded toward her, wrapped in a blanket, her hair tousled. Daddy said it could come up, Nora said sleepily. You're not mad. Not at all, Faye said, kneeling down. You can come up here anytime. Nora looked out over the horizon. Do you like being this high up? Sometimes, Faye answered, but the view's better when you've got someone to share it with. Nora leaned into her side. I think you're cool. Faye laughed. That's good to hear. Later that week, Faye announced her intention to step back from day-to-day operations at Lancaster and Rowe. The media called it a strategic pivot. Insiders speculated about health or scandal, but those closest to her knew the truth. She was choosing her life, not just her legacy. Will's new job meant longer hours some weeks, but the difference in him was unmistakable. He no longer carried the weight of survival in his shoulders. He came home with grease under his nails and ideas in his head. Ideas that Faye listened to, supported, and sometimes quietly funded when he wasn't looking. One evening, after Nora had gone to bed and the city had quieted to a hum, Will stood in the kitchen, staring down at a small velvet box. Faye entered, barefoot, holding 2 glasses of wine. What's that? She asked, setting the glasses down. He turned, box still in hand. I didn't plan to do this tonight, or maybe I did, I don't know. All I know is I've been carrying this around for a week. She stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "I don't want to wait for the right moment," he said, "because every moment with you already feels like the right one." He opened the box. Inside was a ring simple and elegant, a perfect mirror to the one she had once given him. Only this time, it was his turn to ask. "Will you marry me, Faye?" She didn't cry, she didn't gasp or freeze. She just took his face in her hands and whispered, "Yes." The next month moved in a blur of quiet preparations and loud joy. There was no media announcement, no gala reception, just a small ceremony on the rooftop of the community center with the mural behind them, Nora in a white dress holding the rings, and a string quartet playing under the open sky. Faye wore a dress without a designer label, Will wore a tie he picked himself, and when they said their vows, they didn't promise riches or perfection. They promised truth, laughter, partnership, a home built on more than walls. Afterward, Nora ran between the tables of friends and volunteers, her hands sticky with frosting. Will pulled Faye into a dance beneath the soft glow of the string lights, and for a long time, they didn't speak. They didn't have to. They had already said everything that mattered. Much later that night, as they curled up together on the couch of their new apartment, not a penthouse, but not a walk-up either, Faye rested her head against Will's chest. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "The high rise, the drivers, the six-figure meetings." "I thought I would," she said, "but I don't." "Why not?" "Because home isn't about height," she said. "It's about who you're standing next to." He kissed her hair. "So this is it then?" She smiled. "This is everything." And in the quiet hum of a life, finally lived on their own terms, in the warmth of a love born from a single act of kindness, Faye Lancaster and Will Thorne stayed exactly where they were. Together. The morning air was heavy with the promise of summer, the kind of warmth that clung to the skin but carried a softness that made it feel like a blessing. Will stood in the backyard of the new house, a modest two-story home tucked into a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. Not flashy, not sprawling, but entirely theirs. He wiped his hands on his jeans, stepping back from the half-built planter box he'd promised Nora they'd fill with strawberries. Behind him, the sliding door creaked open. "You're going to give yourself a sunburn," Faye said, stepping out barefoot, holding a glass of lemonade with one hand and a stack of mail in the other. He reached for the drink, taking a long sip before glancing at her fingers. "More wedding congratulations." She nodded, handing over a thick envelope with a familiar crest. "Your cousin sent a gift card to a hardware store, said it was time you learned to build something that doesn't have wheels." He laughed. "He's not wrong." She leaned against the railing, watching him. "You've been out here every day this week." "Trying to get it done before the heat sets in," he said, then paused. "And maybe because it still feels unreal." Faye tilted her head. "What does?" "All of it." Will looked around the swing set Nora had insisted on, the rosemary bush she'd planted on a whim, the wind chime that had arrived without a note, but sounded like something his mother would have chosen. "I forgot what normal could feel like." Faye's expression shifted. "This doesn't feel normal to me." He raised an eyebrow. "No." She shook her head, stepping down onto the grass, her dress brushing her ankles. "It feels extraordinary." He reached for her hand, fingers curling around hers. "You still think about it, don't you? Everything you walked away from." "Not in the way you mean." She sat on the edge of the deck, pulling him down beside her. "I think about how much I used to believe I needed that world to matter. How long I convinced myself that power was the same thing as purpose." Will studied her profile, the sun catching the copper tones in her hair. "And now? Now I get to choose what matters, and strangely, I don't miss the boardrooms or the 6 a.m. conference calls." She turned to him. "But I do miss one thing." His brows lifted. "What's that?" Running things. He laughed. You want to be the boss of something again. Faye nodded, then pulled a folded brochure from her pocket and handed it to him. It read, Southside Innovation Collective Women in Trades Program. He scanned it, then looked up. You're starting a trade school. Not exactly. I'm funding a vocational mentorship program for women and girls who want to learn everything from auto repair to electrical engineering. Have the space, some of the community center volunteers are on board, and you happen to know a certain someone who's excellent with engines. His eyes widened. You want me to teach? I want you to co-lead, she said. I'll handle funding, structure, outreach. You teach them everything you know. Will leaned back on his hands, quiet for a moment. You really think I can do that? I know you can, her voice was certain. And I want Nora to grow up in a home where she sees us both building things that matter. He was still holding the brochure when Nora burst out the back door, her shoes mismatched and her hair still damp from the morning shower. Daddy, you promised we'd go get paint for my room. Faye turned to her. We can go now, if you're ready. Nora grinned. Can we get the sparkly kind? Will groaned. Do I have a choice? Nope, she called over her shoulder as she ran back inside. Faye stood and offered him a hand. We'll need lunch too. He took it, pulling himself up. You driving? I thought you might want to take your new truck. He grinned. You mean the one you had delivered with a bow on top? It was subtle. They piled into the truck 10 minutes later, Nora chattering from the back seat, asking questions about glitter paint and whether the new strawberries would taste like candy. Will drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on Faye's thigh. They stopped at a home goods store, where Nora debated between lilac and seafoam for nearly 20 minutes before choosing neither and going with Galaxy Dusk instead. At the checkout, the clerk scanned the cans and glanced at Will. Big project. Just trying to make a kid's dream come true, he said. The clerk smiled and handed over a receipt thick as a novel. Looks like you're doing just that. Back home, Will helped Nora tape the baseboards while Faye laid out the drop cloths. Music played low through the speakers, something jazzy and old, the kind of tune that made the day stretch out in soft, endless lines. Later, after the paintbrushes were rinsed and Nora had fallen asleep in a nest of pillows on the couch, Will found Faye in the kitchen, barefoot again, humming quietly as she arranged a plate of fruit. He walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She called you Mom today, he said quietly. Faye stilled for a breath before turning in his arms. She did. He nodded. Did you hear it? I wasn't sure I did. You did. Her eyes shimmered not with fear or surprise, but something quieter. Something that settled deep and stayed. She didn't ask me if it was okay, Faye said. She didn't need to. They stood there for a long moment, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint whistle of wind outside the screen door. Will drew back just enough to look at her. You still have that compass. She reached into the drawer beside the stove and pulled it out. I keep it where I can see it, she said, so I never forget what direction led me here. He took it from her, turned it over in his palm, then set it gently on the counter. We don't need it anymore. No. We're not lost. She leaned her forehead against his, not even close. The weeks that followed were filled with the kind of chaos that didn't feel like chaos at all. Curriculum planning, tool orders, community outreach, and more paint on the floor than the walls. Faye worked side by side with Will and the other volunteers, never once retreating behind a title or a desk. She was up to her elbows in grease and still somehow managed to coordinate donor events and organize logistics with the efficiency of a woman who once handled billion-dollar mergers. When the Southside Innovation Collective officially opened, the turnout was bigger than anyone expected. Local news crews showed up, drawn by the rare partnership of a former Wall Street executive and a mechanic who'd once nearly lost everything. But what captivated people wasn't the story, it was the way they looked at each other. Like the world outside their orbit could fall away and neither would miss it. Later that night, as the last guests trickled out and the lights dimmed in the workshop, Will pulled Faye into the garage bay. She looked around. Did we forget to lock up? He held up a small, square box. Not yet. She narrowed her eyes. You already proposed. I know, he said, opening the box to reveal a simple silver chain with the compass resting at its center. This isn't a proposal. She took it from the box, her fingers running over the familiar surface. It's a reminder, he said, that no matter how far we go, we built our direction together. She clasped it around her neck, then looked up at him. I love you, Will. He kissed her softly. I know. They walked out into the night hand in hand, the stars above them quiet and steady, the air thick with the scent of summer and motor oil and something else, something permanent. In the months to come, the house grew louder with laughter. The program expanded to include carpentry and plumbing, and Nora's glitter-painted room became the envy of every child who walked through their door. There were hard days and long nights and moments where exhaustion threatened to pull them under, but never once did they doubt the life they had chosen. They had found each other in a city of millions, in a moment that should have passed without consequence. But it hadn't, and it never would. Because love, when built on truth and forged through fire, doesn't fade. It anchors. And they were anchored for good.